There's a foundational myth of the Old West. The lawman in the white hat, a lonely beacon of virtue against the lawless frontier. But what if the man wearing the badge was the biggest threat of all? History, from the gold-dusted camps of Montana to the vice districts of New York City, tells a darker story. It's a story of men who took an oath of office and then weaponized that very authority, using their uniforms, their access to records, and the public's trust to commit crimes that made the acts of any common outlaw look like petty theft. We're not talking about a quick bribe or a little bit of corruption. We're talking about systemic, organized crime and even murder for hire operating under the color of law. When a corrupt lawman like Henry Plummer used his sheriff's badge as a command post for a massive murder ring, he wasn't just breaking the law. He was shattering the very foundation of justice, forcing honest citizens to form vigilante groups just to survive. Today, we're diving into the lives of 7 American lawmen who, by expert criminological analysis, were qualitatively more crooked than the criminals they were sworn to chase. We will explore the frontier architects of violence, the urban extortionists, and the federal con artists who betrayed the public's trust, proving that the greatest danger to a society isn't the criminal who rejects the law, but the authority figure who secretly abuses it. Our journey starts on the volatile American frontier, where the rule of law was often weak and the explosive wealth of gold created a perfect vacuum for corruption. Here, the badge was not a symbol of justice, but a tool for consolidating power and legitimizing pre-existing criminal ambitions. First is Henry Plummer, the archetype of the corrupted frontier official. In Bannock, Montana, Plummer secured election as sheriff in 1863, a position that gave him the perfect cover for a vast criminal enterprise. Plummer was the alleged leader of a gang known as the Innocence Road Agents, who preyed on the invaluable gold shipments and travelers moving between mining camps. Plummer's crime was strategic and systematic. He used his official status and that of his deputies to gain vital intelligence on stagecoach routes and the schedules of miners carrying significant gold. This official knowledge became criminal intelligence, allowing his gang to execute planned robberies and homicides with devastating efficiency. Early accounts claim the gang was responsible for over 100 deaths in late 1863 alone. His organizational skills, including the use of secret code words and distinct knots in their ties for identification, far surpassed those of any typical outlaw gang. Plummer's actions caused the judicial system to collapse entirely, directly leading to the formation of the Montana Vigilantes to administer justice, as the constitutional lawman himself was the criminal mastermind. The final dark irony of Plummer's life came when he was summarily hanged in January 1864 on the very gallows he had requested built while serving as sheriff. Next, we encounter James Deacon Jim Miller, a man who embodied hypocrisy and calculated malice. Despite holding titles like Deputy Sheriff and Texas Ranger, Miller's primary profitable career was as an elusive professional contract killer. He charged $150 per murder job, specializing in ambushes using a shotgun. His victims often included lawyers, business rivals, and tragically other lawmen. He was even suspected of assassinating former lawman Pat Garrett, the man who killed Billy the Kid in 1908. The number of men he murdered for hire ranged from 15 to as many as 51, according to his own admission. What made Miller profoundly more crooked was his mastery of impunity. He cultivated the paradoxical nickname Deacon due to his pious Methodist facade, his abstinence from drinking, and his impeccable attire. This respectable public image was instrumental in exploiting the legal system. Arrested multiple times for murder, Miller repeatedly achieved acquittals or had convictions overturned on technicalities. He transformed murder into a successful business model where his legal status and public piety provided a shield, allowing him to operate as an efficient executioner with near-zero legal risk. Our third frontier figure is Timothy Long-Haired Jim Courtright, who utilized his time as city marshal in Fort Worth, Texas, to lay the foundation for later organized crime. After losing his elected office, Courtright returned to Fort Worth and established what he called a detective agency. In reality, This was a front for a sophisticated protection racket designed to extort profits from the saloons and gambling houses in the notorious vice district known as Hell's Half Acre. This was systematic theft utilizing knowledge gained from his law enforcement experience and the reputation for violence he had cultivated while in office. He leveraged his former position and knowledge of the city's criminal ecology to replace the Outlaws as the chief profiteer of vice, creating a profitable private criminal monopoly based on intimidation. We've only scratched the surface of these stories of law and lawlessness. History's full of folks who hid dark truths behind respectable faces, and those are the ones worth remembering. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and stick around to check out our other deep dives into the untold corners of the Old West and American history. In the rapidly industrializing cities, corruption evolved beyond frontier anarchy, becoming an institutionalized and politically sanctioned financial engine. The badge became a form of currency, traded for protection and graft. Alexander S. Williams was a captain and inspector in the New York City Police Department during the reign of the Tammany Hall political machine. His brutality earned him the nickname Clubber, and his control over the high vice 21st Precinct. The Tenderloin led to him being called the Czar of the Tenderloin. Williams' corruption was structural. Police promotions and assignments were often secured through political influence, with officers viewing the desirable post as an investment guaranteed to return profits via graft. Williams himself was the epicenter of this financial network, collecting protection money from criminals, including the operators of brothels, gambling dens, and policy shops. Williams's philosophy was chillingly simple. There is more law on the end of a policeman's nightstick than in a decision of the Supreme Court. He financially controlled the criminals in the Tenderloin, who could not operate without his protection and payment. This made Williams the ultimate profiteer of organized vice, achieving a criminal scale untouchable by any common street gang. Frank Canton, born Josiah Horner, is perhaps the most remarkable example of a criminal utilizing the system for profound personal benefit. Horner was a violent outlaw, bank robber, and escaped convict from Texas. He successfully reinvented himself in Wyoming under the new identity, Frank Canton, and became an inspector for the powerful Wyoming Stock Growers Association and later a deputy U.S. Marshal. Canton's new law enforcement career allowed him to commit high-stakes violence with the protection and financial backing of the state's most powerful economic interests. He became a key figure in the Johnson County War, where he and his associates were accused of operating more by assassination than the law against small ranchers. This ability of an escaped, violent outlaw to seamlessly transition into a celebrated lawman and use that authority to commit politically sanctioned violence proves the core hypothesis. The badge amplified his capability for destructive, large-scale criminality. As an outlaw, Horner was hunted. As Frank Canton, he was paid and protected by the elites to hunt others, turning his criminal expertise into a highly profitable, legal-adjacent career. The early 20th century saw corruption reach into federal agencies where the stakes were higher, and the targets were not just gold or vice, but national crises and political trust. Gaston Means represents the intellectual and parasitic form of law enforcement corruption. Means had a long history of unsavory activities, including accusations of spying and a suspected murder. He briefly achieved status as a bureau agent in 1921 during the Prohibition era and immediately monetized his position. He extorted significant sums of cash from bootleggers, promising to use his federal influence to secure their release or immunity. He allegedly pocketed up to $60,000 per day from this operation. Means profited by selling the failure and involvement of federal law enforcement, a crime fundamentally different from simple bootlegging. Means' ultimate act of treachery came in 1932, following the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh's infant son. Means convinced wealthy socialite Evelyn Walsh McLean, a friend of the Lindberghs, that he was in contact with the kidnappers. He persuaded McLean to give him over $100,000 for expenses to secure the child's release, fully exploiting a profound national tragedy and a mother's desperation for personal gain. This act of callous, high-level confidence fraud demonstrated a moral depravity exceeding that of almost any common criminal, leveraging his federal pedigree for ultimate betrayal. Our final figure is Franklin Buckskin Frank Leslie, who exemplified the lawman whose badge provided a critical shield for personal, impulsive violence. Though he held positions like U.S. Army Scout, Leslie was primarily known as a gambler and gunfighter in Tombstone, Arizona. In the chaotic environment of Tombstone, Leslie utilized the social license granted to lawmen and gunfighters to justify violence. He was involved in multiple killings that were officially ruled self-defense, allowing him to eliminate rivals and settle personal scores. For example, he shot Mike Killeen in 1880 over Killeen's wife, whom Leslie then married 8 days later. The legal framework of the frontier often accepted the justification of a well-known gunfighter, enabling Leslie to commit murders for malice while remaining legally protected. His status provided an impunity that a common outlaw did not possess. The people of Tombstone only succeeded in prosecuting him when he violated the unwritten code of the frontier, murdering his unarmed lover in a drunken rage in 1889, an act of egregious malice that finally shattered the veneer of justification. The lawmen we've covered were more crooked than the outlaws they ostensibly pursued because their crimes had critical amplifying factors. First, their increased lethality. Figures like Jim Miller and Frank Canton could commit murder, often against other authority figures, with a dramatically reduced risk of prosecution compared to acknowledged outlaws, making them vastly more efficient killers. Second, they had monopoly control. Lawmen such as Alexander Williams and Jim Courtright achieved total criminal control over entire districts and vice networks, establishing institutionalized systems of extortion that typical street gangs could never rival. Third, they executed high-level fraud and betrayal. Gaston Means committed sophisticated intellectual fraud, using federal status and national tragedy to steal, representing the ultimate betrayal of government trust. The qualitative difference in their crookedness lies not just in the volume of their crimes, but in the betrayal of the sacred trust imbued by the badge. Their success came from manipulating the legal framework and public perception, transforming the symbols of justice into shields for their criminal enterprises. They are the figures that prove a crucial historical lesson. The ultimate danger to a society is not the criminal who openly rejects the law, but the authority figure who secretly abuses it. This raises a final important question. Which of these 7 crooked lawmen do you think caused the most lasting damage to the public's faith in law and order? Let us know in the comments below. We do our best to read all the comments, and we always appreciate hearing your thoughts on these complex historical figures. Be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more authentic history, and comment with your opinion on which of these men was the most treacherous and why. Thanks for watching.